All right, we are back, Build 2015. We're going to talk about Windows. Some really interesting announcements, a lot of great work coming down. John Sheehan's with us. I'm sure some of you remember him for several years ago talking about AppV. You're also with us at Build 2012 with Alesh. That was fun. So right off the bat, let's talk about the Universal Windows platform. So tell us a little bit about what you've been working on.
So for Windows 10, we decided to take a step back and look at what assets we had for Windows. And what we had was a whole bunch of operating systems, a whole bunch of platforms that were similar, but they weren't the same. And developers were obviously unhappy with that situation. So we decided to take all these separate operating systems that were on the same basic code base and actually make them one.
Amazing. So it is one operating system, to be clear. Let's talk about the build.
Yeah.
You made a lot of tremendous changes in building these SKUs of the operating system. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, the build team's amazing in Windows. They had to go and take all these different build systems, all these different ways of doing everything, because when you build a telephone, you have to go and make images one way, and when you build Windows, you make it a different way, and when you do Xbox, you make it a different way. And they had to basically combine all of that. And so really we had to start at the bottom with a build system and get that as a common thing. So then we could build one operating system. So then we could, in the same way, go and make Xbox and make Windows and make phone.
Awesome. So this is live, as you know. Ask questions, anything Windows related. One of the things that wasn't really talked about here at Build, but is interesting to people who are interested in operating systems, are sort of at the operating system level, so underneath the platform, the changes that have been made to enable what you just talked about in Windows. So I kind of want to geek out a little bit about how Windows itself has evolved, right? The kernel's probably gotten, smaller or different?
Yeah, actually, so as part of that process of trying to build one thing, the first thing we had to do was work on factoring. And so we had some guys that did great work refactoring the components in the operating system so that we could have a much nicely layered platform so that we could start small and then add components on top of it. And so, we had multiple Bluetooth stacks, and so now we have one Bluetooth stack. And we had multiple audio stacks. Now we have one audio stack.
Right.
And so all those teams had to go off and do just a ton of work because you have to run on, a Raspberry Pi, 512 meg phone, and then you're also going to run a huge desktop. You're going to run on Xbox, and you're going to run on a PPI, and you're going to run on HoloLens.
Yes.
And so, but one great thing about it is that as the teams sort of slim down, so they said, great, we need to run on a 512 meg phone. Well, we need to get smaller, we need to get leaner, we need to get faster. As they did that, everyone benefited because, Windows is slowly taking up less memory, it's getting leaner, it's getting faster, and over time that will just continue to happen.
Awesome. All right, so Nike wants to know, this is actually great. Tell us more about the classic Windows 10 desktop apps and Windows Store that was announced yesterday, Win32.
So I'm doing a talk later at 3:30 on this. What we're doing is we have this product called AppV. It's application virtualization. And what it lets you do is basically run an install, like on a VM or on a clean machine, and it captures all the changes that were made to the system by the installer. And then it packages it up, and then you can deploy it to millions of machines, and there's no more install. It's just declarative. It just gets laid down, it just runs. We're taking that same technique, and we're using it to take these classic Windows apps and convert them into universal Windows apps.
Nice.
And I think the thing that people don't realize, and it's going to take a little while to sink in, is that once you do that conversion, you are now a universal Windows app. Right now, you still only run on desktop for all your Win32 components, but over time, you can start to add features to your app that are full universal window app features. So you can add an app-to-app background task or something. And you can do anything that a universal Windows app can do because you are one.
Amazing. Now, in terms of being one, Win32 apps have obviously desktop apps have a different sort of process lifetime management infrastructure.
Yep.
So it's not like you're going to get the modern PLM, or are you? I mean, that would be...
So for your Win32 components, your classic components, you won't, because we're still letting your code run the way it always did.
Sure.
Right? But if you build like an app-to-app service, so you say, great, I go into Visual Studio, I say I want to add an app-to-app service, that's actually going to run in the app container, and that's going to have the modern PLM. And then what we have a lot of experience of doing, even in Windows, is taking these classic desktop things that we had and slowly moving them into making them apps. So if you look on Windows 10, the Start menu is actually an app. And the way that most people, the way that we've learned to do it is we start actually by building the UI in XAML and running it in the app container. And then only for things that don't work in the app container do we kind of shell out to the desktop, to the full trust stuff. And then over time, we slowly evolve it. And the amount of stuff that's running full trust gets less and less until it's gone. And then once it's gone, now you are just a regular UWA.
Awesome. All right, Eric wants to know, is the Universal App Platform a new combined runtime for all languages, or do the multiple runtimes get compiled down and are still separate?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question. From that standpoint, it's just like it was in Windows 8 and 8.1. So we have the Windows runtime, and that gets projected into all of the different languages. So right now we support C++, we support JavaScript, we support all of the managed code languages. And so, so that's what we still have. We're taking that and we're just pushing it further. I think the more interesting thing is now what we've done is we've combined and we have defined an API surface that is core and runs everywhere.
Yes.
So if your code is only programming to that, you run everywhere. And almost all of the apps we're seeing built do that. What some people do then is on top of that say, hey, when I'm running on phone or when I'm running on Xbox, there are extra features and extra APIs that only exist there. And you can dynamically light up and use those things when you're running, for example, on an Xbox.
Absolutely. So can you explain more about the continuum feature? Patrick wants to know.
It has all Windows. Well, I'm not sure I understand that question either. So,
what is the continuum feature, man?
Well, so what continuum is really it's what we call the ability to morph your user experience from saying, hey, I'm sitting and I'm on a laptop and I'm in laptop mode. So I've got a mouse, I've got a keyboard, I have overlapping windows, and then maybe I either detach the keyboard or I flip the keyboard backwards. And now I'm really I want to be in tablet mode, and the experience can seamlessly morph to now it's a great tablet experience. No more overlapping windows. You have kind of the 1D model that we had in Windows 8.
Okay.
And so, and then you decide you plug the keyboard back in or you flip it back into desktop mode. From a developer experience, there's not a lot. You don't really have to do anything because you always have to support that your window can resize anyway.
Sure.
So when you go into continuum mode, you just get a resize command, and now you're just bigger. If you want to, you can also say, hey, am I in tablet mode? And if I am in tablet mode, I'll change my buttons, I'll change the location of them, or I'll do something to customize it for tablet mode. But most apps usually don't. They have their experience that they paint at a size, and it already works well both for touch and mouse.
And that's partially due to the fact that they're writing for a platform that was full immersive window, unlike in Windows 10 where you now have apps running in Win32 containers, if I can call them that. They're running in Windows.
Yeah, in overlapping windows, yeah.
So, all right, so Nike wants, I think we already talked about this, but is AppV performance good enough to run something like games?
Two things I'll say. First of all, Project Centennial isn't AppV. We use the techniques of AppV, and as part of standing up the project, we've been using AppV as kind of a starting point. But it actually is it's a wholly separate thing, and it has different goals than AppV did. So AppV's purpose was really, and they were selling to IT groups. And the IT group didn't own the software. They didn't own the code. The code was already compiled in some build lab, was already burned to a DVD or copied to an MSI and shipped. So they couldn't actually change any of the code. And so AppV has to be like bug for bug compatible and has to do any crazy thing that any random app might take a dependency on. We're not taking that approach for Project Centennial because we're targeting the developers. And we're saying your code's great and we want to use it, but you might have to make some code changes. Like maybe not, hopefully not a lot. I mean, but all the apps we've seen so far, like for example, if you looked at the keynote, we had Photoshop Elements. The only thing that they changed there was they just changed their licensing code because their old licensing code was expecting MSI to basically tattoo the system for licensing reasons. And when they were deployed through an AppX, they weren't tattooed. Now, from the performance standpoint, interestingly enough, games are the easiest thing to virtualize or to do in any of these environments because games tend to be very much, they don't tend to integrate in lots of parts of the system. And the code paths that actually have, that AppV or Project Centennial touch are actually the code paths that aren't critical path for performance anyway. It's the create path. It's when you're reading and writing to the file, that's just happening without, there's no participation by the runtime. When you're opening the file, there's a little bit of participation, but that's not critical, right? So yeah, so it's easily performant enough for games, and we always end up because we have to test the software. We always tend to do games first, so that when we're testing, we get to have a little fun too.
Awesome, man. So Carl wants to know, rebuild the Windows 10 kernel. Does this mean there's a new Windows driver model, a new driver SDK for Windows? So it's an interesting question. I mean, clearly there's been evolution in the driver model in Windows, both kernel and user mode.
Sure. Right. Well, so the most interesting thing in that area is that there's now a single universal driver kit. So you build a driver, and it can run on anywhere where the hardware is. Like you don't have to build one for phone, and then you have to build a separate one for desktop, and you have to build a third one for some other device.
Amazing.
You just build a single driver. And so if you look, for example, at the graphics drivers, which are some of the most complicated drivers, the graphics driver that runs on phone and runs on PC, it's the same driver.
Wow, awesome, man. Universal drivers. All right, will AppV be used by all apps, not just apps in the store?
I think they probably mean Project Centennial.
Yes.
But,
so let's be clear about that. Project Centennial is
the thing that's part of Windows that will allow you to put your Win32 apps in the store.
Great.
AppV is an enterprise technology that has a ton of features that we just don't have. It has a ton of manageability. As I said, it will do a ton of things that Project Centennial would never do to get apps working. But the store and the platform and the store are obviously very closely related, but there's still a level of distinction there. So these are just apps. So even in Windows 8 and 8.1, you could sideload apps and you could install your own apps. In Windows 10, we've made it easier. I don't know if you've seen the demos with the Dev Unlock now.
Yes.
You just go into a control panel, you flip a switch, and now you can install whatever you want.
Awesome. And
that's true both for UWAs and obviously for Project Centennial apps, because as I said, they are UWAs. So.
Very, very interesting. Can you share more about everything that Cortana will be able to do? Hey, you're on the Cortana team too, huh?
Yeah, not on the Cortana team. So
right
I hope you have a separate session on Cortana. I work very closely with them. They do amazing stuff, and I know they have amazing things coming, and I would never, ever want to accidentally announce it for them.
Excellent, Matt. Thank you. So, thanks, Josh. I like your shirt a lot.
Yes.
Sub Pop, old school.
Seattle.
Right on, man. Since apps run on both platforms, PC and phone, will it be possible to sync PC and phone tiles in the Start menu, in the Start experience?
I think you mean sync layout, and we actually don't sync the layout on purpose because normally, I don't know about you, but with my phone, I get a perfect layout where I have all the information exactly where I want it.
Yeah. And
that works great for my phone. And on my PC, I have a perfect one, but they are different. I have a different amount of real estate. I have, I tend to be doing different things with my phone than my PC. So we actually don't sync it. It's perfectly reasonable to do it, it would be a reasonable feature to build, but my understanding from all the research that they did is that it actually isn't something most people want.
Sure. Okay. So are Win32 apps that are distributed via the store also updated by the store? So as the sort of deployment models change, has the update changed?
And differential update.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're absolutely updated by the store. They're installed and updated exactly the same way. I can't stress it enough.
Okay.
It is a UWA, right? So it's a Universal Windows app. It's packaged in AppX. It's got all exactly the same format. You can really think of Project Centennial as we really took the Universal Window platform and AppX, and we added some features to enable the Win32 extensions. And if you think about it that way, you realize that yes, it absolutely is updated exactly the same way. So all the great differential stuff that we do, where we only download the blocks of the files that have changed on disk. We hard link everything, so there's only one copy of a file on disk at any one time.
Nice.
It's a very, very efficient pipeline. And yes, the Project Centennial apps use it exactly the same way.
Excellent. So I know that you keep saying this over and over again. It's a UWA. It's a UWA.
Yeah.
However, when Win32 apps sometimes have complex installation. So I'm going to install my app, and then as part of that installation process, I have to install something else.
Yep.
Maybe I want to run a service. I install that, pull some stuff down, whatever.
Yep.
And then of course I have a complex deinstallation or uninstallation.
Mm-hmm.
So with UWP apps, I can just say remove, and
Yep.
it's gone. It's the same for Win32.
It's the same for Win32.
Right on, brother.
Yeah,
That's
so
good.
so the interesting thing, and actually the thing that's very magical and that I think is really going to get people excited is the process for getting rid of your MSI forever is you run it one last time. Like you run it its last time, and no matter how complex it is, the tool just captures everything, and then it bundles it up so it's declarative. So there's no more like crazy install anymore, and then it just deploys.
Awesome, man. Really, really excellent. So is there a new media player in Win 10? The current looks old.
Well, we had starting in Windows 8, we created the video app, the music app. Those are continuing to evolve and get better, and so that's really that is the new media app, media player, but it's been around for years.
Awesome. Juan wants to know, will Universal Apps support WCF, Windows Communication Foundation?
Yeah. Oh, so actually, this is a great question. So I believe it's back in now. So one thing we've been doing as part of Windows 10 is, if you remember in Windows 8, we had all these great new APIs. And at the time, we basically said, if there's an API that does something, then we won't bring the Win32 one forward. So if you think, for example, about like networking. So we built a new WinRT socket API that was really easy to use, really performant, great API. But there were a ton of people out there that said, well, that's great, but I have WinSock code. And the answer was, well, great, now you have to take your WinSock code and turn it into WinRT sockets code. In Windows 10, we've gone back and said, you know what? WinSock is a perfectly great API surface. It already works inside of the app container, so why don't we just add it back? So we did. And then things like create thread, like we didn't allow create thread. And then because we have create thread can be dangerous, and create thread you can get it wrong. And thread pools do all the work for you, so why don't you use the thread pool? Well, but I have a lot of code that already uses create thread, so we brought that back. We're bringing back tons of APIs, both in .NET and in Win32, so that it'll make it easier and easier to take your existing code base and convert it and make it a UWA. Cool,
and of course you had to do that to support the Win32 model in the first place, right?
Well, but the Win32 stuff runs full trust, so it is already using all the same code, right? The thing that makes it really interesting, and what we've been doing internally is, you start with that conversion process, but that's literally step one. After that, now you say, great, well, my UI kind of like Media Player. My UI kind of looks old and kind of antiquated.
Yeah.
Let me go build a new one. You build it using XAML, you run in the app container. Oh, but you still have a bunch of other code that doesn't quite work in the app container yet? Great, that stuff runs full trust. Over time, you basically get your stuff into the app container. And once you do, you throw that away, now you run on Xbox. Now you run on HoloLens. Now you run everywhere.
Nice.
And so it's really this great progression that you can get your stuff in there. But what we didn't want to do is say part of that is get rid of your WinSock code or get rid of create thread. Yeah. So we added all that. So inside the app container for all universal apps, they can all use those APIs.
Beautiful. So can universal apps be downloaded and ran from outside the store, not just for testing, debugging?
Yes, well, I mean that was already true. That was already true today, but with the it was more complicated in Windows 8 and 8.1. If you look at what we've done now for Windows 10, now we have that control panel. So you go into the control panel, you flip and say, hey, I want to be able to install apps from outside the store, and then yes, you can install them.
Cool. Pravin wants to know, will Win32 apps run on phones?
They won't. And the reason being is that the phone doesn't have all of the subsystems there to actually have all those APIs continue to work. So if you look at the size of like the kernel, the size of what we call one core, the size of the core of the operating system, it's pretty slim. And that's what runs on HoloLens and phone, and it runs on desktop. Desktop adds just a ton of stuff. Tons of APIs, tons of things that were built 20 years ago that people still use. And we actually couldn't put that everywhere. Like that's not going to fit on a tiny little phone that's, that has 512 meg of RAM, and 8 gigs of storage space.
Sure.
And so because we slimmed it down, those APIs aren't there. But once you go through that, you go through that migration process and you get all your stuff into the app container. Now you're using the subset of the API surface that will run on phone, that will run on Xbox, it'll run everywhere.
Cool. Can you please explain more about the Windows Store affiliate program?
I'm not on the store team, and I know nothing about the Windows Store affiliate program.
Right on.
Sorry.
Do you manage dependencies so that you do not have a bunch of different C++ runtimes installed for each Win32 application? Or are all those bundled into each UWA?
Well, so another thing that we did in Windows 10 was we actually now have the C runtime in the platform, like a stable version of the C runtime in the platform. But as probably all you C++ developers know, you will often end up with a dependency on some random flavor of some C++ runtime, the one that your build system uses, the one that your test team tests, and that whole DLL hell thing where your app would work fine today, someone else would install an app, they'd replace your CRT with something else and you'd break. Well, because of that, we have to allow those apps to have their own instance of it. Luckily, when I talked about that deployment technology, one of the things it does single instancing. So when it goes to download the app, for each file it says, well, before I download this file and waste bandwidth and then waste disk space, do I already have this exact file? I mean, this exact same ones and zeros? If I do, just hard link the file and move on. So if you had 50 apps and they all had, like the latest version of the, VC 2008 C runtime, there'd be one copy of the file on disk. If you went and looked in all the directories, it looked like there'd be 10 copies. They use NTFS hard linking under the cover, so there's actually one copy.
Awesome, man. Smart. Does Windows 10 support transaction on file system by default? Memory transaction? Question.
So I'm not on the file system team. I know that that NTFS always had that transaction support. I also know that it wasn't the best feature we ever shipped. And actually, it's funny because it's no fault of the file system team. The biggest problem that we actually have is the hardware. In order to make cheap hardware and still make it run fast, the hardware sometimes lies to the file system.
Okay.
So the file system says, are those bits on disk? And the disk will say, yes, they are. And they're really not yet. But they're just in a cache. But they want the system to run fast.
Understood.
And so one of the problems that we had with the transaction stuff was just that the hardware would lie to us. And there was and the file system couldn't know was lying. And so I know in general, we discourage people from using those APIs. We didn't put them into the MSDK, and we're not going to put those in the MSDK because it's really not something most apps should ever attempt to do.
Right on. So let's see. You're not on the Xbox team.
I'm not on the Xbox
So we're not. Thanks for asking the question, John. If I have an IoT device, can you talk IoT?
Sure.
Can I choose what parts of the OS core I include for storage size limits? Or am I stuck using the entire OS core? Some devices may have less space than others. Can the OS run on 8 megabytes?
So as of right now, no, you can't take pieces of it. Other than that, I'm not going to speak for what the IoT team's plans are for 8 meg devices and stuff.
Sure.
They own that story. They can tell you.
Great, right on, man. So Windows 10 still has very old apps in it. Windows Fax and Scan from Vista. Will these be removed in the final version?
I don't believe we're removing anything. We laugh sometimes. We'd love to see that stuff removed because it would make our lives easier. But there's probably still someone that's using it somewhere. And as we've learned before, every time we remove something, someone gets upset. So.
Absolutely. Well, that's what happens when you have almost 1 billion users, right?
Yeah.
So when you uninstall a Win32 app from the store, will it remove the only dependencies and regedit info?
It will, basically what happens is it'll remove the app and all the stuff that came down in the AppX. And then additionally, we do two things. All registry writes we capture and we store in a separate app hive. That's how we prevent the system from getting slow and unreliable over time. And then any writes that it does to the app data directory, we redirect into its UWA app data directory. When it gets uninstalled, those get removed. And so that cleans up the app. But if you create a bunch of documents and save them in My Documents, those will still be there.
Cool. Well, hey, it looks like it's a wrap. Thank you for asking questions. Sorry we couldn't get to them all. John, thank you for coming on.
Great.
Always great to chat with you, man. We'll be back with the IoT show, I believe.